أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Today I will be speaking about neuroscience, of course, and some books I've been reading and enhancing, furthering, as well as advancing my area of expertise, for lack of a better term. And of course, this will entail me reviewing some books, and obviously I'll be taking some questions if there are any. I'm doing this after a while. Had some assessments, some changes I needed to make. So, alhamdulillah, we are here now. Just going to update a few things. Right, so should be done here. Just gonna make sure that everything is working. Right, so it seems that the video is not correct. Is this better? Hopefully it is better. I think I misjudged it. Yeah, it's better. Right, okay, so as mentioned, I will be speaking about books mostly, and I've been reading a few books, and the idea behind them is to ensure that with each passing moment I am able to be speaking about so with each passing moment I can advance my own understanding and help my students. Yes, I've had students in the past, but I'm always looking to add more, just to ensure that at the end of the day this field of neuroscience can be expanded. So first and foremost, I'm going to begin with the worst of the worst. Michael Gazzaniga used to be one of my favorite researchers. To a degree still is, but the problem is that he wrote this book in 2018, and after reading the first chapter, instantly I knew it's not him. 3 critiques. Number 1. Number 2, it's extremely reductive. And number 3, he's made some historical errors. One of them is that he states the law of refraction was put forward by a European whose name, according to him, was according to him, it's Descartes. Apparently Descartes discovered the law of refraction. So the law of refraction is essentially where light goes into a medium, usually a dense medium, in this case glass filled with water, and light refracts, so it goes in a certain direction. So this is the vector. So imagine for a second, this space is the glass, this particular region has the water, right? So in effect is all of this. And so I pass light through here, let's say red light, so the wavelength is short, goes through here and it cuts like this. Most famous example is you put a straw in a glass or a pencil and it refracts. Now, this might seem like a very mundane, arbitrary, rudimentary, very basic scientific thing. For us, of course, it is. Just the way Wi-Fi doesn't seem like a technological miracle. Ibn Sahal, the Arab philosopher, astronomer, and scientist, he's the one who formally put this forward, right? And the tragedy is that he's not even mentioned here. And Ibn Sahal was the one who formally put this idea through. And without Ibn Sahal, that piece of scientific finding and research would not have entered into Europe. France, Germany, Austria, Italy, the Renaissance was prevalent in Italy. In any case, one would say, alright, it's just one error, what's the big deal? This whole book is about consciousness. And I'll explain in a moment why there's a common theme amongst the following books I'm about to show you. Number one is consciousness. Number two is decision making. Scientists, neuroscientists, biologists, psychologists, even historians to a large degree cannot really explain the process and the genesis, the origin of decision making in human beings. Even anthropologists struggle with this. Now, and the third thing is navigation. And a fourth, which is loosely tied to all of this, are memories. The memories we have. Sorry, I have a comment here. Thank you very much. Don't forget to like, message me if you wish to learn more. By the way, this entire enterprise is self-funded. I personally do not have the aim of primarily funding this entire project in terms of having a gain. The only gain I am concerned with is the akhirah. Okay. Again, that's a journey. So my interest in neuroscience began with that whole concept of one's journey. Because yes, one would say this is right, this is wrong, but how do you come to that conclusion? Again, decision making, consciousness, and navigation. You have to navigate your way through the thick and the thin. Thick being difficult times, thin being less difficult, less challenging. And the fourth thing, as I mentioned, which is loosely related but still very much relevant, memories. You have a memory of a bad thing, of a good thing, and the thing could be a tangible thing, like a pen, for instance. Someone gave you a gift. Or the memory could be intangible, like an emotion. Although emotions can be tangible. For example, when you're stressed, your pupils dilate, skin conductance. So the way your skin, in terms of its temperature, relative to the allostasis, used to be known as homeostasis, which are your internal autonomic processes. For example, right now, you're watching this video, you probably ate or drank something, your blood pressure, digestion, and other chemical processes are not within your control. They're happening whether you voluntarily know or you don't know about it. On the other hand, we have, of course, slightly less autonomic things. By slightly less autonomic things, I mean reading a newspaper compared to reading your timeline on X or scrolling through TikTok. The reason I say that's semi-autonomic, because there has been a massive change socio-politically, and socio-political change is so obvious that it's not obvious anymore. I'll explain in a moment what that means. once upon a time when I was growing up, I remember, and I'm talking about 2001, 2002, when I used to live in London, everyone had bicycles. And I remember having a bicycle with the two supporting wheels at the back. Now, for a very long time, I was dependent on those two smaller extensions, if you want. And they were extensions in the sense of a buttress as in a support. So buttress is, you know, when you see a bridge, let's say cars are going here and there, and you see some poles sometime connected to the ground or like the edge of a cliff, for example, that's a buttress. So when you're riding a bike, you have one small wheel here, one small wheel here, and the wheel in the middle, and you're able to balance. At some point, you become comfortable where you just need one. And then after that, you don't need any. So the thing with the smartphones and the social political landscape, and of course the decisions we make, we, without even thinking deliberately, we just go on social media. At least, I would argue, 4 to 5 times a day, minimum. I do that. And the reason I do that is because I connect with researchers. I'm looking at new research that's happening in the field of neuroscience, and I'm trying to look at the shifts in the political narrative, understanding the new scams that are being released through the government, through other places, and understanding new reforms and laws, and of course keep in contact with my close ones. But not often, but seldom, I do find myself zombie scrolling by virtue of the era of content creation, the era of not prioritizing what you are deciding to look at, because your consciousness has been invaded with your permission. What does that mean exactly? Well, the simplest way to explain this is that when you are viewing, for example, when you're viewing a documentary, let's say, I don't watch documentaries. Let's say, for example, you watch a documentary, you took the decision to go through all the options. There's a wide array of choices. You go through each. You're like, okay, I want to watch a documentary about Egyptian history. You play it. Let's say it's a documentary by Graham Hancock, right? He's a guy who I like to listen to. He has some interesting points regarding history. And he's talking about monoliths, which are these big buildings that used to exist in the Mesozoic era. And he talks about the Mayans. He talks about Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, which is in Pakistan, the Indus civilization. He talks about Göbekli Tepe. Göbekli Tepe is a place in Turkey, which means in Turkish belly pot hill. They found an underground city there. So he connects all these things, and you're, for example, sitting there and you're listening to him or whoever, and you're like, okay. So there's a sequential process happening here where one thing leads to the other, leads to the other, leads to the other. Now, the reason it's novel, the reason it's new, it's interesting, it's fascinating, is because you have not experienced that information prior to you selecting that documentary. It's brand new. You've never come across it. You're not used to it in terms of your routine or your habits. It's completely brand new. That's exactly what technology was when I grew up. Going out with your friends on your bicycles with your football in one hand to the park, sometimes played football on the roads. It was habitual. You wouldn't think twice, oh, what if there's a PDF file around the corner? What if someone steals my phone or steals my bike? What if I get knocked over or kidnapped, so on and so forth? So this is where the social political aspect comes in, where So much fear has been created that even children going out is a big debate amongst parents. However, I do still see youngsters, at least in the UK where I live, boys and girls young as 15, 14, 13, 12. They're dressed in a certain way where you know their consciousness has been, in essence, robbed by TikTok, by the trends, by the hyper-sexualized environment we live in. It's been sexualized since the 60s, to be fair. People talk about now, or the 90s and the 2000s. No, it's been sexualized for many centuries. In fact, a hadith of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam springs to mind, which is, and I'm paraphrasing, he said, protect what's between your jaw and between your legs. The reason for that is because your tongue is so powerful, it can cut through so many layers. Likewise, what's between your legs can cut through so many generations that it can be extremely, extremely detrimental, extremely harmful if you don't take care of it, much like your tongue. So for example, politician doesn't take care of what he or she says, it's detrimental. Now, for example, we see after 600 days of the Jenny besides, the Jenny besides been happening for almost a century, to be frank. And it's quite sad that people are now recognizing it. But alhamdulillah, to the degree that the masks have been dropped, all the rats are jumping off the ship, those who now see what the occupied areas of Palestine are doing, and their people and those people are planning to do, the government officials and of course the people in the higher ups, what they are essentially planning and plotting. And this is not a mistake, this is not random, this is all deliberate. So how does all of this connect with what I'm talking about in terms of neuroscience? Well, we tend to forget that companies like Netflix, gambling companies that sell the solitaire machines. So for those of you who aren't familiar, you put a coin in, you push the lever down, and there's 3 rolls. So it's, for example, it's like a tape. So imagine a piece of tape, it's circular and it spins. And if you get 3 icons in a row, you hit the jackpot. And that jackpot is usually 20,000, 30,000 pounds or whatever. See, those are designed with the help of psychologists who study behavioral psychology, in particular addiction. Because when you go to a casino, I haven't been to one and I never be, I'll never go or step into a casino. But if you go to a casino, the entire area is rigged. Every single table, when it comes to blackjack, when it comes to roulette, all of these tables are rigged. Yeah, once in a while someone would win a few million, that's great. But the idea is addiction. You spend £1, then £5, then £10, then £15, then you win £100. You're like, okay, wait, hang on a second. I'm going to spend a bit more, a bit more, a bit more. A more minute and I would say more pathetic version of this is something I've experienced as well, and I'm guilty of this, which is, for those of you who live in England would know, when you go to the seaside, Clacton, Weston-super-Mare, Southend, you put a penny into one of these sliding machines, and the idea is that you put a penny and the penny jumps at the end, so it hits the end essentially wall of this machine. The coin bounces back and hits and lands on the pile of the existing pennies, and the slide goes like this. It just goes at one pace, and essentially you have to time when you throw the penny, and when it slides, maybe those pennies at the front, they slide to a degree where there's another layer at the top, very thin sort of layer, metal sheet, and it slides like this and more pennies drop. And sometimes they have a gift like a key ring or a soft toy, like a USB stick, something random, pair of headphones wrapped up in a rubber band, really arbitrary random things. So that is addiction, because you go to a machine, you put £1 into the machine, it gives you 100 pennies, you fill your cup, and next thing you know, you end up spending £4 or £5 for a keyring that is worth less than 10 pence. Whereas that idea of what's commonly known as the dopamine addiction cycle, right, which is your VTA area. It's a system that exists in the midbrain. It's called the ventral tegmental area. The idea here is the information that's going in your system through your eyes, through your ears, even through your mouth. Some drink you like, some food you like, so on and so forth. All of that is going into your system, and it's feeding what metaphysically people refer to as the ego. It feeds the ego, right? And you want more and more and more, because if you feel like, you know what, if I do it just one more time, I'll satisfy my urges, I'll win that bet, I'll win that penny, I'll win this, I'll win that. Now, that's a destructive cycle. Take it to a slightly bigger level. It's when people gamble with football matches, horse racing events, rugby matches, cricket matches, the list goes on, right? UFC as well. That's why, to a large degree, in fact, 99% of football, I have no idea what's happening. Don't care. All a scam. It's all a distraction. Just like this guy who supposedly tried to unalive some scum rallies in Colorado, which I don't agree with at all. You shouldn't just do that to anyone, really. But that was a distraction from the fact that a company called, let's say, Talon Pair, you can Google the real name, Peter Thiel's company, fascinating company in terms of their rise. They now hold the data of every single American. So the idea of so-called freedom of speech and liberty is out the window. These things never existed. Just like Judeo-Christian is a made-up term. It's an oxymoron, literally. If you can find me a Jewish person who believes in Isa alayhi salam, then that person is not a Jew anymore. Likewise, Christians do not agree with the Jews because they believe that they killed Isa alayhi salam. A'udhu billah. For us, as per chapter 5 of the Quran, Surah Al-Ma'idah, we know it appeared to be so. It seemed like, yes, someone killed and injured Isa alayhi salam. Seemed like, yes, right? So these contradictions, to understand them, you have to go at a deeper level, right? And consciousness, I thought, okay, let's step into consciousness. So I found this book, first chapter, pretty dull. Next book, which I came across, this was actually purely by accident, but I don't believe in accidents personally. I believe in nasib. It's the Islamic concept of destiny. This guy, yes, he's one of them, but I believe he is an atheist. Irrespective, really. He definitely installed a lot of things in my mind in terms of how to move forward with my academic life. Now, I was actually reading his book after reading Surah Al-Rum. I came across his book, which I have here actually. This is a slightly more advanced and mathematically based book. It's called Beyond the Cognitive Map, and it talks about cellular biology, talks about cognitive neuroscience and the different methods used. And subhanallah, the amount of detail this guy goes into is pretty amazing. It was written in the 90s, mind you, so it's quite amazing the amount of advanced technology they had at MIT. It's published by MIT. This one is published by Oxford, but this book is, I would say, a more popular science book, but not really, because he explains things in a very loose, simple way, but in a comprehensive way. Comprehensive where he has many footnotes, he has many references he gives, and they all relay back to what I'm planning to do in terms of advancing my own personal neuroscience journey. And I've taken many notes. It's been a long time since I've taken this many notes when reading a book, really, because I feel the 21st century quality of literature is not the same as the 20th century. So yeah, for those of you interested in a book on consciousness, decision making, memories, and slightly touching on navigation system, as well as the dopamine cycle and things such as addiction, emotion, stress, regret as well, talks about that a little bit. I would highly recommend this book. This is by far the best neuroscience book in the easiest language you'll come across, by far. So the subcortical region, or should I actually the cortical region that fascinates me the most out of all the brain regions is the hippocampus. So I managed to find a 1970s official publication. This is volume 1, couldn't find volume 2. And the beauty of secondhand books is that they're extremely easy to find, especially if they're old. The thing is, you have to really dig deep and go through many, I would say, hours of really understanding what you're looking for. Because there's many books on the hippocampus, by the way, but very few of them give a historical background and where there are areas that need to be touched upon. So, for example, I was reading about how the hippocampus is a comparator when it comes to decision making. So what that means is that the region of the brain, a region of the brain called the hippocampus, plays an important role when it comes to decision making. And the idea is that the hippocampus acts as a rubric, as a guide for you to ensure the decision you're about to make is a good one or a bad one. Now, it's very difficult. It's what many refer to as a suitcase term, which means the word has many meanings packed inside it, like consciousness, good decision, bad decision, and love, stress, pain, pleasure. There's so much packed in these words. It's quite incredible that most of us live our lives without even really giving it much thought. In any case, when it comes to thinking, our brain actually has particular rhythms. So you have alpha, beta, gamma, theta rhythms. So theta rhythms are essentially the synchronous oscillation of brain activity, which is of course electrical, because we have electrical charge and discharge that's happening between our neurons. So you have afferent that's going and efferent that's being received, and there's billions of neurons working simultaneously, right? So theta rhythms are between 4 and 8 hertz in humans and about 5 to 10 hertz between rats. There's been studies on birds as well, cats as well. Theirs are a bit different. I haven't looked at birds and cats too much per se. I believe the monkeys, non-human primates, sometimes they're referred to as, they are also between, I think, 5 and 8. I could be wrong, I'm just going off of memory. So when it comes to spatial memory and sleep especially, our hippocampus is activated. That's why, for example, I love giving this example. Maybe someone's made this example or exists somewhere else, but I like to believe that I made this example of myself. Let's say you walk in a room. No, let's say you are where you are right now. And I will assume that you live in a place that is not your childhood house, okay? If it is your childhood house, then think of another memorable place. I'm going to go with the childhood house. Let's go back to your childhood house and imagine your room when you were let's say 6, just about when you're learning language and barely grasping the basics. And at the age of 6, when you were 6 years old, imagine your room. Now imagine where the bed was, where the cabinet was, where the door was when you walked in, what floor your room was in, what color it was. Hopefully by this point you're also imagining the carpet, you're imagining the smell, possibly imagining the window and what you would see outside the window. So this is very much linked with spatial memory, because if I was to take you now to your childhood house, most likely someone else is living there, or it's been knocked over and something else has been created. For example, you can easily go up to your room, or if it's on the ground floor or a second floor, whichever floor, go to that respective floor, to that respective room, open it, and then you can literally imagine and play this automatic film in your mind. The hippocampus plays an important role. So my fascination really began with that idea, that the hippocampus plays such a significant role. I'd like to share a picture here of earlier scans of the hippocampus. I'm just trying to find a nice, less confusing version. That's in lesions. Lesions are a type of blood clot, essentially. Right, this is just going to take some time. Right, so instead of an actual picture, I'll give you a rendition, like an image of it. So, not to worry too much about this tree-like figure in the box. That's what's referred to as pyramidal cells, essentially, and they are layered, just like our personalities, just like political narratives. The idea is that you have to dig deep into those layers. Anyway, so here's an example, as you can see, of the hippocampus. And if you Google hippocampus, there's many neurosurgical pictures of the hippocampus. Very fascinating looking cortical area of the brain. Hippocampus actually means seahorse in Latin, because it looks like a seahorse. I'm not saying there's a connection there, but it's really fascinating. Anyway, this is the earliest book on the hippocampus, and the hippocampus, by the way, those interested, hippocampus is one of those regions that hasn't been explored in depth, because it's extremely difficult to explore in depth. My thesis is the following. In fact, there's two. Number one is that the heart, we know, has neurons. There's an entire field of study called neurocardiology, right? And I believe there's a connection between the qalb, which is the heart, and the brain, but more particularly the hippocampus. I have not come across any work that has been looking at that. That's number one. Number two is a bit more advanced, but I'm going to do my best to simplify this area of research. There's three things that are interconnected. Number one is the hippocampus. Number two is the vestibular system, which I will step into extremely briefly. And the visual system. Now, one thing we do not understand is how our brain is able to grasp a concept that is novel, eventually does not become novel. It's an everyday thing, just conventionally speaking. And that everyday thing, that everyday event becomes part of your life and it's stored in your mind. However, when you come across the same event, same person, same place, and there's a slight shift in your expectation, there is a big chance that you will become anxious and afraid. And on the other hand, you might be delighted. It will be what is usually referred to as serendipitous. Serendipity is when something happens which you didn't expect, and it's a positive conclusion. Positive based on your feeling. By the way, going back to Reddish's book here very quickly, when he's talking about decision making, he's talking about the action in and of itself that is played out, which then is referred to as decisions made. So, for example, I'm just going to find an exact quote here, which I found really fascinating because I have not come across. Here we go. So he says the following. We, as in himself, we define decision making as the selection of an action. Obviously, many of the decisions we take are actual actions, but note that even complex decisions always end in taking an action. For example, buying a house entails signing a form. Getting married entails making a physical statement. So, nevertheless, defining decision making as action selection will force us to directly observe the decisions made. And it will allow us to ask why we take the actual decisions we do. And here's a series of questions he asks, which really caught my attention. And this is literally the first chapter of the book, far superior than the one I was speaking about earlier. The series of questions are the following. Why don't those actions always match our stated intentions? Sounds familiar. How do we choose those actions over other potential actions? Nasib. What are the systems that select actions, and how do those systems interact with the world? There's many Islamic concepts that spring to mind. Main one is the waswasa of the shaitan, which deviates one almost all the time. How do they break down? So how do you break down decision-making processes is what he's asking. That is more subjective and of course requires human intellect in terms of the context of where you are, what you're doing, who you're doing it with, and the variables involved, so on and so forth. What are their vulnerabilities and failure modes? This is more of engineering terminology being used here. This is what the rest of this book is about, literally. So he's addressing these questions in this entire book, packed with references, packed with papers. I've come across a few papers. In fact, the one I was mentioning earlier, Hippocampus as a comparator, is by a Russian lady from many years ago, Vinogradova Hippocampus as a comparator. So she speaks about the theta rhythm of the hippocampus and its connection with the brainstem, and we know the brainstem is responsible for motor control, motor action. We also know it plays a part in the visual process. Going back to my second thesis, vestibular system is essentially the otolith organs in your ear, which are responsible for the balance system that exists in your ear. If you're wondering what I am talking about, here's a very simple picture for you to understand what I am referring to. So it's page 39, I think it was. So the otolith organ is the cochlea, the saccule, and the utricle, and then you have the anterior posterior utricle, which has different functions and connections and circuits. Similar to the thalamus is another region of the, I think is the midbrain. I hope so, it's the midbrain. And the thalamus has many portions that, for example, the posterior region of the thalamus plays a huge role in auditory perception, and the thalamus also plays a role in facial processing and emotional processing as well, though the amygdala is more dominant when it comes to emotional processing, such as fear. Insula is another area which is as seen to be more activated when it comes to disgust, when you're disgusted by something or someone. Anyway, so the otolith organ are basically bones on each side of your on each side of your head, left ear and the right ear, and it looks like that. I'm not holding the book upside down, by the way. So if you Google otolith organ, beautiful shaped bone, subhanallah. See, the thing is, neuroscience can explain and biology can explain how the processes work within or around the vestibular system, but it cannot explain why it's shaped in this manner. In fact, there's hairs within this particular organ, the otolith organ, which moves as we try and balance our system. By a system, I mean the body, right? And there's calcium deposits that exist, which allows it to be chemically, I would say, competent. Why calcium? Why not sodium or potassium or zinc or magnesium? Well, no one knows. Of course, as Muslims, we always say Allah knows. And unfortunately, in this book, Douglas Tweed, he opens up in the first chapter speaking about natural selection made our brain. Natural selection is the reason we are able to execute any motor control, which allows us to have consciousness and feelings. His definition of consciousness is a bit different, but really and truly, natural selection is complete nonsense. And there's many individuals that are now tackling this idea of natural selection and what we know as Darwinian evolution, right? And I'll share a few stuff that I haven't touched on them yet in depth, but inshallah at some point I will. Last but definitely not least, apart from the vestibular system and hippocampus and the visual system, last point actually regarding that particular thesis is that it's very difficult to know when we come across something, as I was saying earlier. We are able to recognize it and integrate it, yet we are unable to predict errors or make a value judgment correctly. For example, I know if I don't leave by this time, I'm going to arrive late. Yet I'm like, you know what, man, just give it a couple more minutes. What's the big deal? Those couple more minutes may not be the same as the previous time, but I'm still being late. Now, is the problem the root, or is the problem regarding the amount of leeway I'm supposed to give in terms of leaving much earlier? But the problem is that if I leave much earlier, I will be arriving much earlier as well. So it's, despite knowing what you're doing and recognizing these patterns again and again, you still end up doing the same thing. It's quite remarkable how the human psyche works in that sense. So my whole thesis is that, okay, if I'm walking down the street and I see a building, I need to understand depth perception. In one of my videos regarding the philosophy of neuroscience, I talked about the vision system and the visual cortex. I touched upon the ocular dominance columns, they call it ODCs. These are columns based in the retina, and the retina is a very powerful area of the eye. I mean, the entire eye is powerful, nothing like it, subhanallah. But the optic nerve, they cross in the middle and they go to the opposite sides of the brain. And so any disruption there, for example during a stroke, has major consequences, and in very rare cases people do turn blind, because the optic nerve is so sensitive, as it in a sense is lies within the main arteries of the brain, which are affected by stroke. So again, assuming one is normal, walking down the street, you're perceiving a car which is far away but it's still kind of near. Then you're looking at a building which is still kind of far but it's still near. And then you look at a third thing. You can't tell if it's a person, a post box, or something else. The closer you get, you realize it's neither a person left outside on the street, fly tipping. But for some reason you didn't really recognize it, although you walk down the street and you could recognize everything else. My whole area of inquiry is, how are we able to gain all this information and predict that error, qualify the error as being an error, and the next time you're walking down the street you might see a car, but it's not actually a car. As you get a bit close, it's actually a tent, but it's shaped in a certain way. It's like, for example, you've probably seen these pictures on the internet. There's bushes, there's a road, and there's some houses, and it's a picture of a man and a woman sitting together, but it's actually trees and a house. That whole idea of depth perception, which is an area of visual neuroscience, one of my other favorite areas. So how does our body's balance system integrate that, and then how does that influence our navigational system, issues that may arise within the navigational system as a result of being visually fooled or deceived. And this is, I believe, why many scientists, those who are non-religious, they question the concept of miracles. They cannot understand of the moon, one of the miracles of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then coming back of it together. Yeah, the splitting of the moon is amazing. Just as amazing is the moon coming back together. Another one of his miracles is that in a bowl he put his hand and it was filled with water. And it was filled with water in that bowl that all the Sahaba reported at the time. They all drank from it, they stored it, and they gave it to their animals. He could see behind his head, so he didn't really have eyes on the back of his head per se, but he was able to see what's happening behind him. And that is a hadith where, again, I'm paraphrasing, whereby Muhammad ﷺ said to some young Sahabi that, hey, I can see you laughing and playing with your beard during salah, during prayer. So be careful, be vigilant when you're praying. Many other miracles, for example, when he simply grazed his hand over a Sahabi's shin and his shin was fixed as if nothing ever happened. So there's many things here, and it's extremely unfair to basically categorize them into one. Last but definitely not least, something called cognitive modeling. Now, cognitive modeling is a bit more technical. I managed to find this book again in a second-hand bookshop, £5 a few months ago, can't go wrong. Preface to this book is that Rick Cooper, fantastic researcher, interesting lecturer, I had the pleasure of being taught by him and meeting him as well. He was explaining cognitive models of ACT R, and this is the other one which I need to get right, so I'm double checking here. It's called SOAR. So ACT R and SOAR are essentially these models that are used to explain large language models, the current AI models that exist in the market. And this particular book just gives a breakdown of the innate mind. Thus, its name is The Innate Mind, Culture and Cognition. I could only find volume 2 of this book. Actually, this would probably be more clear if I do this. So, stumbled upon this particular book, and I was reading an interesting chapter on simple heuristics. So heuristics is a type of signal, a type of cue, a clue, an indication of something. And something could be language, it could be an action, so on and so forth. So here they talk about, again, how consciousness plays a role in machine learning and machinery, and talks about connectionism, how one sphere is connected with the other. Basically, my interest, again, is in cognitive modeling and research into space. Mars research, to be specific. So, yeah, I just thought I'll share what I've been up to, really. And we see that the genocide that's going on is absolutely horrific. We've seen that Syria is now looking to essentially become close friends and good friends with occupied Palestine, which is absolutely unacceptable and abhorrent. So, I mean, where does this end? To be honest, where does it end? See, the problem is that you see, when Trump went to Saudi Arabia, right, they gave him a plane, like a big boy plane. And I'm not sure how true this is because I don't really believe in any of the mainstream narratives, but let's say it's true. It might be true. And I say it might be because it's very difficult to confirm this, but he was upset with how big it is to maintain and how difficult it is to ensure that the plane is justified in terms of him receiving the plane. And the issue there is that although he did not meet Scumrow, he still went and justified to a large degree what he did. And he was given trillions of dollars. Saudi Arabia have zero interest, of course. Another fascinating thing and beautiful in terms of knowledge and learning is that these particular events have exposed the Arab leaders. They have exposed them to the degree that they're nothing but puppets, really. And if France, Canada, and England really did care about what's happening in Gaza and the death point they created because the CEO apparently resigned, and now it's on record that the Mossad, sorry, I apologize. Some group in some agency that happens to be everywhere. I don't know why people say they happen to be everywhere. Happen to be at this humanitarian site in Gaza, and 30-odd people were found on the other end of what they were expecting, because they were expecting at least some food until they are unalived till next time. Rather, they were shot at. You can see and hear American mercenaries. In fact, they've been there for almost a year now, American mercenaries. For those of you who are old enough or cognizant enough to remember, there was a group called Water Black. You can look them up. Water Black was owned and managed by a guy called Prince Eric. And Prince Eric had this supposedly genius idea to go and help America bring democracy. Now, recently, he's teamed up with the government of Haiti. He's teamed up with the government of Haiti to say, hey, look, Haitians, I can bring justice by reducing the rate of crime, because the idea is that democracy brings justice, therefore peace. Not true, obviously. And now he's there. He has a company that creates a special mobile phone that is free from Google and the usual tracking and so on and so forth. So look, I will never kill myself. I will never harm an animal, a man, a woman, a child, or any living or non-living thing or being. And I will never cause harm or destruction intellectually, financially, socially, academically. Just want to put that on record. There have been academics that have been attacked for their stance on the Jenny besides. One of them actually is a neuroscientist, one of my favorite, because of a discovery of the fusiform area. Fusiform area is the fusiform gyrus. It's part of the brain around sort of here that's always activated during facial processing of human beings. In the 90s, Nancy Canwisher, ethnically a Jew, she discovered this, and fantastic course on YouTube regarding neuroscience. For those of you who want to do a course for free, I haven't watched all of it. I've only watched the methods she's been teaching on there, because without methods, neuroscience doesn't exist really and truly. fMRI, EEG, the most basic ones. So she had to leave X and jump on Blue Sky, and there's hardly any tweets by her since last year, really early last year. And not just her, there's numerous others that are now coming out. And again, in the words of one of my favorite writers, Norman Finkelstein, exceptional writer, incredible grammar, very coherent, very erudite. He says, what I mentioned slightly earlier, is that all the rats are now jumping off the ship because they see what Scumrow is going to do now. And yes, essentially finishing up the job, we see the particular Bedouin Arabs looting Sudan of its gold, and along with Rwanda supporting the local militias, and this huge hiccup between the RSF and the government. We see Congo with the M23 and other African nations involved. We see Rohingya Myanmar, where justice is still not being prevailed. We see Dr. Afia Siddiqui still in jail, being constantly framed and harassed. I don't even know how people actually, forget those who experience it, those who are close to these individuals, the lawyers, the doctors, the policymakers, the activists, who literally sometimes sit with them face to face, or at least hear them over the phone. I don't know how they function. In fact, another one of my favorite authors, Chris Hedges, exceptional writer as well, Christian theologian as well, which is really interesting given his political take on war and his take on religion. Chris Hedges explains that when he was in Bosnia and Sarajevo during the Serbian invasion, so the Serbians invaded Bosnia. Again, I didn't even learn this in school. I had to independently go out and look for it. In fact, a couple of days ago, one of the anniversaries of the massacres in 1992, I forgot the name, because these Slavic names are a bit difficult for me. So I need to do better, inshallah. The Serbians massacred the Bosnians, and Chris Hedges was there writing about this. He's a journalist by trade. And he also was in Iraq as well in the early 2000s. And he said that he became depressed. He had PTSD from the bombs and the screams he heard. He's been to Gaza, and he lived in Gaza for a while. He speaks Arabic, so I admit, shame on me, white American man. But again, race and nationality is irrelevant. I'm just saying he's far from obviously being a Muslim. But anyway, he says, when I was in Gaza and Serbia and Bosnia and Iraq and all these places, he said I couldn't sleep. He started to actually drink heavily. And the reason I know this, he did a recent podcast with, I forgot the American guy's name, the young guy. He did a 3-hour podcast, and he explains how his experiences have been. So someone like that, who firsthand is reporting things on the ground, is going through that. And he's a reporter, by the way, and he's in America right now. I think he's gone to Masr, to Egypt. Actually, he's going to Egypt this month, he said, to do some reporting regarding Rafah and finishing his book. And he did a recent talk with Gabor Mate, Jewish psychologist. Parents and he himself survived the Holocaust, and he himself says, I'm sick and tired of the Holocaust. being constantly reverberated every time Palestine is mentioned. And what's sad is that it doesn't matter if you're a Holocaust survivor, or if you're a Jew or a non-Jew, or you survived a different massacre, or you're an academic or a scholar. It's irrelevant. The Zionists, they have managed to penetrate every single faction of our existence that is merely impossible to evade or escape. But you know what? Justice will be served, and I am of the belief that I will be accounted for. In terms of, I will be asked, what did I do when humans were suffering? How did I contribute to the whole thing? Look, my whole aim and idea, and I will conclude with this inshallah, is that we Muslims need to fit in the system to change the system. That's not my saying. That's a saying of one of my teachers, Muhammad Ali Mirza, engineer Muhammad Ali Mirza from Pakistan. And I truly believe that if you want to be a great footballer, you have to become one. So you can be a great footballer. If you want to be a great manager, you have to become one in order to become a great manager. That's why, again, give an example of football. Carlo Ancelotti, Guardiola, Klopp, Zidane, Mourinho, and now recently, what's his name? PSG's manager, him, and many of the managers. Obviously, football is a scam, but the point is that the system that they develop and the formations, that certainly requires decision making, memory, intelligence, and consciousness. So everywhere you go, these factors do play. But inshallah, we pray for everyone. And there was actually recently a volcano erupted in Italy, Mount Etna, near Sicily. Beautiful area, absolutely stunning. And that volcano was extremely terrifying to look at, and people were literally running for their lives. And it reminded me of the ayah from the Quran, which I'm paraphrasing, which I should know, but I'm paraphrasing, that when death is right in front of them, in terms of the atheist, them being the atheist, they remember God and they start asking Allah for forgiveness and repentance and so on. But Allah is Al-Ghafur Rahim, and He is the most gracious, most merciful. All the death and carnage we see of Muslims, certainly they go into Jannah, but the question is, am I? Are you? Or will you? And can you? Till next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.